So we're jumping back in with some Baldur's Gate Tactica here, looking at the Avenger, building the Tactica checklist, and exploring some of the options of this unique class. Now, in all the vlogs that I've been pushing out in exploring the various character classes, based on our playstyle, based on what we're feeling in the moment, and this is true in tabletop D&D also, we naturally tend to gravitate towards certain characters in the game. Even if you look back and you've had the chance to run through the saga with multiple run-throughs, I'm willing to bet that 80 or 90% of the time, you've got your core characters. For me, that's a sorcerer, that's a magic user, that's a fighter, and especially a monk. I for whatever reason, well, I know the reason I love playing monks, playing through a monk lots and lots of times. But then there are other classes that, while they might not be the primary classes we play, in terms of subclasses, they get even less play than the primary class. And I feel like the Avenger is one of those, not only in playthroughs that I've pushed through, but in exploring some of the options in Tactica with some friends, it just feels like the Avenger is overlooked. Meaning players that like to play a Druid tend to play Druids. I was going to say vanilla Druid, but let's say baseline alpha Druid. And for those that are looking to explore non-character classes that they regularly play, like, hey, Fritz, I always play, Wizard Slayer. I'm going to go with a Druid this time. It tends to be the primary classes. Now, I feel like part of this is because they've tried to implement classes from an advanced Dungeons & Dragons system, porting it into a fixed rule set. And we know that with the Druid, some of the werewolf shape-shifting aspects was never implemented in the code. There's other character classes that, in theory, sound good in a role-playing game, but when they translate over to Baldur's Gate, again, being a static, fixed game, primarily a fighting, stat-based game, the transition isn't as powerful. But in looking at the Avenger doesn't fall with any of this. And what had prompted me to push out this vlog is I just completed a run-through, and this run-through I wanted to literally focus on playing an Avenger because I hadn't played the class in a while, and I had a blast. I had an absolute fun time exploring and playing this character. Pushing out the Tactica. Is it an overlooked character class? Is it one of the best character classes? I rate it as a sleeper class. It's got a lot of bite, and it's got the best synergy of 3 potential classes, 3 potential abilities. All right, let's jump in and build our Tactica checklist, and then I'm going to turn it over to you guys in the comments. Agree, disagree, and where does the Avenger, Druid Avenger, rank? So let's talk about stats. 2 kind of ways to approach stats. The first is from a role-playing perspective, because you just kind of click through and what you get, if it's reasonable, if it's kind of old school AD&D, you play that. I'm not making a judgment, but I tend to be, I click and I'm like, I need like 90, 91, 92, maybe 93. I've probably spent more time clicking through generating stat scores than I have actually playing the game. And if you approach it that way and you do that yourself, I click once for the roll and then I stop. I don't just click, because I can't tell you how many times that you get into like a mindless clicky where you're clicking, all right, 78, 82, 78, 82, 88, 72, 76, 88, and then it'll be like 94. But you click so fast, you move by it. And one time I got a 94 and I clicked by it. I'm like, all right, I got to put the tablet down. I got to walk away. I got to take a break, and like just crazy. So on a side note, your little click through, you got to go slow. I like to have 18s. I like to have 18s in charisma. I like to have 18 strength, 18 con. Yes, I know certain classes, once you go past 16, it doesn't make a difference. But if I'm 18 plus tome plus a bump, then I can start getting regeneration. I like to have the 18s. I'm not like a power alpha player because I got to sit there and earn it. But I like the higher end 18 stats. The first thing with the Avenger is, you're a Druid. You got your little Druid powers, and you did that ritual thing, and the powers bind to you, and your con is at a 16. That's the highest it can go. So what this means is approaching natural regeneration. And I won't say this is a major point, certainly, because healing spells are there, magic items are there. But if your goal is to get natural regeneration or natural bonuses when the other stats get into 20, you're starting at 16. You're starting at 16. Tomes are not really going to make much of a difference, but we'll still zap it with the tomes. And that means if I am going to go with a regeneration, ring of regeneration, or troll item, then I'm occupying a slot to do that. Not a game changer. And I'm illustrating this because one of my early hangups with the Avenger was like, well, I can't get 18 con. Well, it's not a frontline fighter. And is it really that necessary? Is it really that necessary? Because I can bump it up to 18. Do I really need, 20, 22 natural before I start putting on magic items? So once we get past that, the Druid becomes very, very potent. That's only really the downside with the Avenger is that's as high as you can go because that's the trade-off. But here's what you get. We have the whole book, the whole grouping of Druid spells. And this is interesting tactically from two perspectives. First, it's a fun playthrough because there aren't really very many good Druid support characters in the game. Now, if you're making a solo run, that's fine. But if you're going to pull in the party, there are certain storylines, there are certain characters that are better than others that you want to explore. I'm not going to give away any spoilers. I'm sensitive to that. But from that perspective, and as an example, if I'm playing a magic user, do I need to pull in another magic user in the party? Well, if I do because I want the storyline or I want to leverage that's redundancy. And Baldur's Gate is interesting because being D&D and being limited to the party size, you don't always want redundancy. In a war game, if I'm leveraging my tanks, I want 6 tanks, and I want them kind of the same potency. So if 2 get taken out, I still have more to go. Baldur's Gate, I want to have my skills spread out. Do I need 2 rogues? I don't. Do I need 2 frontline fighters? Yes, but do I need 2 fighters? No. If I have a fighter or a paladin or a blackguard and a fighter, do I need multiple clerics? No. Now, if I have a cleric multi with a magic user, that's a little bit different. So the challenge jumping in with the Druid not really being mainstream, you don't have to worry about redundancy and pulling that in. You get to enjoy and bring the Druid in and not worrying about having that duplicity, that double in the party. That opens up a lot right there. Plus, there are some, no spoilers, but you can look out for it in part 1 and 3. There's some interesting aspects open and available to the Druid if you play that character, kind of sub-quests and little storylines that aren't always mainstream or pursued. So it's kind of fun to play that. So bringing in the Druid spells, yes. Then we get into shape-shifting. And the shape-shifting is really neat because early on in part 1, it starts to have a lot of potency. And early on in Siege, or if you're jumping into part 2, in certain situations, it can be stronger than the Druid itself, especially if you have another character buffing and then you shapeshift or you shapeshift and you're buffed. It has a lot of potency. It has a lot of bite. So early on, if you're fighting some of the harder quests, it's more potent than you really think. It's more potent than you give credit for. As you advance in the game and you become literally more godlike, the shape-shifting just becomes fun. It just becomes fun to be able to transform into certain things and do that. Now, you can also get that through certain magic items. I'm not going to give away locations or spoilers, but the natural ability of the Druid means that I don't have to expend an item slot to have that magic item. It frees things up. So you get to have something that's potent and early, necessary, helpful early on, and then as the game continues, just kind of something fun. Well, Fritz, that sounds like a regular Druid. Yes, that is a regular Druid. The Avenger is a Druid. But now this is where the Avenger shines. And I left this for part 3 last because I wanted to kind of outline the general aspects going into the Druid so we understand its role, their role, her role in the party, but also to understand now where the Avenger is a Druid plus, and I'm going to make the argument that it is the best Druid class. For just a trade-off in con, that even if you're obsessed with rolling 92, 93, and 18s, you can really look past that. You have access to select natural ability wizard spells, magic user spells, and some really, really good ones. Now, I love playing monks. Dark Moon Monk, kind of cool on the narrative perspective, but the wizard spells that you bring in that you can replicate, really not that great. Helpful, but, I can do without them. I'm pulling in a cleric class of Talos, that's a cool spell, but cleric spells are potent in their own way. So it's nice little clickies to have. It's fun, but it's not game changer. The Avenger is, with also the Druid spells leveled on. So the first one and the best one, Chromatic Orb. Absolutely. Now this is AD&D rules. Chromatic Orb in tabletop D&D has been stripped down, forgotten, outplayed. In AD&D, it is brutal. It is an auto-include for a magic user. It is auto-include for a sorcerer because you get this spell, so you get it as an Avenger. It's like a mini Finger of Death. It's like a mini killy spell because it does damage plus effects, and the effects stack as you level up. Damage is kind of secondary. You have a chance to stun, you have a chance to blind, you have a chance to turn to stone, you have a chance to paralyze, all this cool stuff as it levels up. This is a spell that you can just cast, that you can utilize. Now, yes, you have to beat saving throws. Yes, at the higher levels, some of the things that you're going to be fighting, and I'm not even talking about like iconic monsters, stuff you might throw the orb at. Is it going to pass its saving throw? Well, you have a wizard / magic user that can debuff and cast spells and pull it down. It's just a useful offensive spell to have that levels and scales up as you go. And remember, this is in addition to all of your Druid spells and your Druid stuff and your shape-shifting. So you've got powerful spells, useful / fun shape-shifting, and a whole list of effective magic user spells. Next is Web. Web is amazing. I mean, not giving away too much Tactica, BG1 Web is the best spell in the game. It's fantastic. Web and then fireball stuff, or Web just to slow down the mobs. Tactically, Baldur's Gate is a fixed combat game, meaning, generally speaking, the AI is when monsters see you, they attack, and that attack is just to run at you. It might be to engage with missile weapons. It might be throw up some defensive spells and then throw spells. It might be using a power, turn invisible, and then attack you. I mean, there is a hierarchy of AI, but essentially once you're seen, things are going to run towards you. And it's not quite Icewind Dale where it's waves and waves and waves of stuff, but you can get overwhelmed. And based on the screen that occupies, for the most part, the party needs to stick together because combat is happening. I can have one of my party members run off far away, maybe to hide, or if they're wounded, to pull them off. But the combat is still going on, and it's in that radius that you're fighting. So to be able to throw out a web spell, I mean, that's a Tactica in itself, and stop most of the monsters, most of the encounters coming at you. And again, there's saving throws, there's things involved, but it's a persistent, eventually they're going to fail. It's not a one-time thing. As they're in the area effect, it's constantly saving, but it's also an interrupt, which means not only are you held in place, but whatever you're trying to do, if you're trying to cast spells or use powers, you're interrupted. What? The Druid Avenger can throw this out and utilize this plus Druid spells plus shape-shifting? That's bite. Those two right there are worth the price of admission Tactica that will take you through and be useful in 1, Siege, and 2. Just absolutely for a con trade-off. And I can't wear super heavy armor? Okay, big deal. I mean, fantastic. And again, Druid spells and shape-shifting. Well, then we move into invisibility, improved. That's helpful, because that allows you to now operate from a base of invisibility with your Druid spells. What? That's alpha. That's awesome. No spoilers. There are some select monsters, but this is just true AD&D lore. There are some select monsters that will be able to see you and see through invisibility, and there are certain AI points that'll throw up a million dispels and do that. Okay, but there's a lot where invisibility is powerful, is very, very powerful in the game, very, very useful. If, for anything, allows you to be in a position and pop off a spell. Like, very potent, very awesome, a lot of fun. And then we get into lightning. Throw a lightning bolt. Absolutely powerful. Absolutely powerful. And again, scales. Lightning is interesting because it bounces. Now, this is kind of old school AD&D rules where it extends out, it bounces. If you can time it and you can utilize it and you can push that out, that just zigzags, bounces. This is bonus spells. Now, how these stack, so you have potentially 3 offensive spells. Druids, by their default, and I push this up in the general Druid Tactica, you're summoning pets everywhere. Druids are master summoners, whether it's insect swarms or pets. So, and pets and summons and skeletons, that's the bulk of BG1 Siege and even BG2 as they get more powerful. The ability to summon these things and utilize these things, you just throw out this army of stuff, and then I switch to my offensive spells, which are innate. So I'm not having to dedicate priest slots, divine slots, to offensive spells. And there are some interesting offensive spells, and I do want them. But I can throw out the massive summons, especially loading up on certain encounters that are going to be multiple parts. I can have more than enough summons, throw them out, and then use my lightning bolt, use my chromatic orb, use my web. Like, that's fantastic. That's like crazy, amazing. And then we have some debuffs and some other aspects with the spells that they can utilize. Again, what you gain in the fixed abilities, the fixed clickies for a Sacrifice of Constitution, and what's the most potent about the Avenger is these never become useless. They grow in time. They grow in power. They are useful across the entire 3 chapters of the game. Unlike the Dark Moon Monk, and again, I love monks. I always play monks. I usually play vanilla or Dark Moon. You know, certain things cap and certain clickies you're just not going to use. And the character class, what you lose is supposed to be gained by certain aspects of these clickies, and they're not that good because they cap out midway or at the end of BG1. Avenger's just beast mode all on. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys now. Is Avenger the best Druid class to play? My vote, yes. In terms of divine priest spells, now it's not fair to say, look, best class in the game, Avenger, because a fighter is also, the fighter class, the support class, the wizard, magic user class, and the divine priest classes. Those are the primary buckets, the primary channels. For divine/priest, I would argue that the Avenger is absolutely, without hesitation, the best class to play. And if you've made your run through the story a bunch of times, you don't usually play a Druid, I want to challenge you. Just go through BG1 with an Avenger. And it is refreshing. It is a lot of fun. And the character has tremendous power, potency, and flexibility.